Survivor's Guide to True Crime includes discussions of sexually based violence and is not intended for children. Information provided should not be used as a substitute for professional medical or legal advice. Please exercise discretion and self-care. Welcome back to Survivor's Guide to True Crime. I'm Kim.
And I'm Kara.
So as we've mentioned so far in season 2, we're changing up the format a little bit, and this will be our first guest episode of the new season. What that means is that you're going to hear a little bit less from us at the beginning of the episode than what you're used to, but don't worry, those are the ones that we're doing every other week, and we always are interacting on Patreon as well. So let's get into today's guest.
This was actually recorded quite a while ago, so hopefully I think that it translates really well, honestly. We recorded this actually last year or at the beginning of the new year, something like that. All I know is I was very much still pregnant. So you will hear me, I'm pretty sure I will mention something about upcoming baby and being pregnant, things like that in the interview. So just keep that in mind. This was recorded before we went live. We pre-record episodes. That being said, there's still a lot of meat and still a lot of good content. We were reviewing like what we talked about on this episode, and there's just so much good stuff. So put your listening caps on for our episode, our interview with Veronica. Tell us about Veronica.
We met Veronica at Podcast Movement last year, which was held down at the Gaylord in Denver. Immediately hit it off and knew that she could bring a lot of expertise and a breath of fresh air to you, our listeners, because everything that she was immediately talking about, Kara and I are sitting there with our mouths hanging wide open. And it's going to be really fun to dissect. This is definitely somebody that we're going to want to have on again because just wealth of knowledge. So Veronica Cisneros is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's a speaker, marriage coach, podcaster, course creator, retreat host, like you name it, she does it.
You're definitely going to want to give her a follow. We'll make sure that we put that link in the show notes. But let's tell you a little bit about Veronica. So she has a marriage that spanned over 2 decades. She has 3 daughters, and she has a career that's soaring. Veronica is a living testament to the power of rekindling relationships amidst life's whirlwinds. Her personal journey from the brink of divorce to celebrating 23 years of marriage. I can't believe she's old enough to have a 23-year-long marriage. First of all, wait, what? So her journey of going from divorce to celebrating 23 years of marriage is a story of self-discovery, growth, and unwavering determination.
As a licensed marriage and family therapist, marriage coach, and the vibrant voice behind the Empowered and Unapologetic podcast, she's the ultimate expert who has walked the path of nurturing connection in the midst of bustling demands. With her relatable charm and infectious humor, Veronica resonates with high-achieving moms and wives who, like her, have struggled to protect their husband's feelings while yearning for a stronger connection.
Even though she's a family and marriage therapist, if you're not married, you're still going to get lots of valuable content from this. She is the go-to partner for transforming relationships, turning the roommate vibe into an electric soulmate synergy through practical tips, heartwarming stories, and her signature wit. Veronica lights the way for every woman who refuses to compromise success for love and craves that unbreakable marital bond. So this is content that regardless of your relationship status, you're going to pick up something here that you're going to be able to relate to and take into your life. And it's just a really good episode. All of our episodes are really good. What am I talking about?
It's not just for intimate relationships. This is interpersonal relationships across the board. So we hope you love this as much as we did having the conversation. And hold on. So we hope you love this conversation as much as we did. We hope you have as much fun listening to this conversation as we did you know what? I hope you like it.
I got you. I know after this interview, Kim and I just looked at each other. We were like, that was so fun. So we hope you love it. Here you go.
Welcome to the show, Veronica. We're so excited to have you here. So we had the pleasure of meeting at Podcast Movement back in August in Denver, and luckily have been able to stay in touch. So we're excited to have you on the show, but tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. What brings you here?
Absolutely. My name is Veronica Cisneros. I own a group private practice called Outside the Norm Counseling. I am huge on motivating, challenging women outside of their comfort zone, really getting to their core fear, their core pain. I also am the host of the Empowered and Unapologetic podcast, where I provide tips and tools to enhance your marriage and not compromise your career. I'm also a mother of 3 girls, and I recently celebrated 24 years of marriage.
Congratulations.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
I want to hear about your background, what brought you into the professional career that you're in now.
Absolutely. So growing up, my dad was severely addicted to heroin, alcoholic, as well as a big time gang member. And my mom sort of kind of did the best she could. She had us in commercials. She did all the things with the exception of setting boundaries, with the exception of really, truly owning who she was, and kind of witnessed mom losing herself in her marriage, losing herself as a mom. And I remember being like 10 years old, hosting like intervention meetings, trying to get my dad to quit heroin, which was pretty major. And thought that I just need to figure out this formula. I'd never gone to therapy. I didn't know what therapists really did. I thought all they did was give advice, and became a therapist and realized that that's not at all what we do. But yeah, there was this one moment. I was in this Upward Bound program as a kid. It was a program for underprivileged youth. And we got to stay at UCSD, which is a big college, right? And stay in the dorms and everything. And I remember we did this exercise where they asked, we want you to introduce your future self. So I remember sitting down and, everybody's standing up one by one. And they're all like, I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to be a lawyer. And I'm like, losers. It's copy paste, right? And I was so excited. I didn't even rehearse it. I just knew whatever was going to come out was going to come out, and it was it. That was real. And I remember getting up and I said, hello, my name is Veronica Flores. I'm a therapist and I own a private practice. And I sat down. I didn't even know what that really meant, but it was just like, it felt so good. And slowly, little by little, people that I was introduced to, professors, friends, parents, it was just, I got to get little tidbits. I called them my angels. I got to get little tidbits from them. And my parents never graduated high school. My dad said he did, but mom said he didn't. But nobody had ever really provided me with a path. And I knew it was going to be big. I just didn't know how to get there. Slowly just getting little tidbits from people that I was introduced to, or just being in certain situations or at certain events. It was like, okay, I could actually make this happen. I'd like to say it was easy. It wasn't. It was scary. It was 1,000% me doing it afraid every day. But I just realized there is something greater. I'm meant to do something really big. And what now I do is I challenge women outside of their comfort zones to get the progress they need, whether it be in trauma-related situations. With women enduring some level of trauma, there's a great amount of fear of putting themselves out there. And so really helping them with skills and healing a lot of that past pain to get them to live the life they want to live, being empowered and unapologetic. I was never able to rescue my mom, and I never really needed to. It wasn't for me to rescue, but now I teach women how to do it for themselves. Like, I empower them so they're able to take these steps that they want to take, even if they're doing shit scared. Like, we're doing it regardless.
I love that. I actually wrote down and dropped a little note to Kim because I want to make sure that we circle back around to this idea of doing things scared, because so often I know Kim hears this. I know I hear this about how I could never, and we will definitely marinate on this. But I just love that you said that. And I love that there's so much of this idea of being empowered, because everyone can use empowerment. Everyone needs it because we're all scared of something and we're all doing it afraid to some extent. And I love this idea of just being able to rescue yourself. And so I cannot wait to see where this conversation goes and all of the little tidbits that our listeners get to pick up from this conversation.
You know what stuck out to me too that I wrote down is to introduce yourself in the future. I physically went, oh, that sounds scary, because what do I do if I don't get there?
Yeah.
What do I do if I just introduced myself and that's not what happens? God forbid it isn't the path that I just said out loud. And I just resonated like a deep-seated fear within myself. I'm like, should probably unpack that later with a therapist. But oh, look what we have here.
Yeah, we'll totally do that after.
Cool. I forgot to start us off this way, but we usually do an icebreaker. So to kick off our second season, tell us what you are currently binging, whether it's a podcast, book, movie, TV show. What is your current obsession, love, binge right now?
So my big binge is I'm reading this book titled Clockwork, and it's all about running a business without burning yourself out. And the whole goal, the idea is to be able to take a month off and the company not go to shit. So really enhancing, current skills of my team and highlighting them and how to go about highlighting them, as well as paying attention to how often maybe I task myself to do more than should be, because I tend to say, yeah, I totally got it. I got that too. And yeah, you need that done by tomorrow. I'm your girl. And I realized, the company's been extremely successful, and realizing that I get to design, I get to play, and learning how to do it.
That sounds like it would be so helpful for us as well. I think of Kim specifically, where she's been like borderline unreachable for the last couple of months.
Seriously.
Because she's just doing so much stuff. And me, on the other hand, I'm like, I'm creating life. So
yeah.
It's a form of setting boundaries too, I think.
1,000%. It is 1,000% setting boundaries. Definitely being able to say no, being able to, instead of trying to fill your calendar with all of the things and stick with something familiar, stepping outside of the comfort zone. I did this podcast interview, and one of my interviewees, she had said, I had to ask myself, does my calendar match my values? And that totally stuck with me, because I looked at my calendar and I was like, oh shit, it doesn't. It doesn't. Like, I don't even have time to pee. So no, if I'm saying I'm a value, it's not reflecting on my calendar.
I wrote that down too, just right now.
Yeah, I'm telling you. After I heard that, I was like, that's it. I had a Post-it note, like right here. It's like happening.
I worked in a corporate setting for a few years, and the calendars, there's meetings on top of meetings on top of meetings, and meetings to set meetings. And like, have you seen the memo about the TPS reports? And it was so draining and exhausting and anxiety riddled for pieces of plastic. And I don't know if anybody else has found this, but for Kara and I, we have worked in crisis situations, in work where we are directly impacting victims of crimes and their livelihood is at stake.
And dealing with actual crisis, not manufactured crises.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
1,000%.
Not something that is just created so that we feel that need to have a crisis.
No.
It is legitimately crisis-based. And then you go into a different setting where people are running around and having meltdowns and pushing for all these things. And it's really hard to get passionate about something after you've experienced something traumatic and trying to manage those things. It isn't always in careers necessarily, but I would say it's probably something that you see often, right? I would imagine in your practice, you see a lot of people like Kara or like me who are trying to balance those things that they've had in their personal lives with where they are in either relationships or careers.
I was thinking in relationships when my husband has whatever crisis it might be, that's his crisis at that moment. And he wants to pull me into it. And I'm like, this is your thing. I'm like, I'm not in crisis mode right now. I'm good. I'm just going to stay over here.
One thing I find with a lot of the women that I work with is when husbands tend to be in crisis, and that's, they go to their spouses to get that support, to get that help, and not knowing that they're, attempting to pull their partner in. They're not doing it on purpose, but it feels that way. One thing that it triggers for a lot, I know we're speaking about women right now, so I'll stick to women, but one thing that it triggers for a lot of women is like, okay, my husband's in his form of crisis, his level of discomfort. I've had this trauma and these emotions wrapped around a particular incident or several incidents. I want to protect my partner from experiencing any form of pain. So what I see a lot of women do is they'll compromise themselves over and over again to go out and protect their husband's emotions, all while being in this trauma response and not having the tools to get through it or even manage it.
By all means, keep going. I'm just going to sit here like, huh? You can't see, we're mouth breathing, just staring.
So, I mentioned earlier, I work with a lot of women. My specialty is women's issues, couples. And I work with a lot of couples. And something that's coming up a lot right now is trauma, where women have been raped, molested, and they're struggling in their relationship because they want to protect their husband's emotions. However, at the same time, they're being triggered. They are having flashbacks. They are having the symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And they're having all of these symptoms, inability to sleep, flashbacks, racing thoughts. And for some, they will let their partners know, hey, this is what happened. For the most part, though, I see a lot of women suffer silently. And then on the husband's end, the husband will say, my wife has shared this with me, but it almost feels like, and they struggle with saying this because they want to protect their wives as well, but they struggle with saying it, but it feels as if I am being viewed as the perpetrator. And that's really difficult for me because I don't want to be positioned in that frame. However, at the same time, I do want to be intimate. And so how do we do this? How do we have these uncomfortable conversations? How do we manage when we are intimate? What is okay? What's not okay? And although it feels like it might be really, it might sound really elementary, like, well, just say it. The reality is there's so many emotions wrapped around that level of communication because it's a very sensitive conversation. And it is a very uncomfortable conversation that a lot of people don't have the tools, or skill set to have. And so you have these emotions that end up coming up, especially during times of intimacy where, the wife definitely wants to be intimate. However, there's all these triggers that are going off. The husband feels like the perpetrator and ends up being in this either an argument or complete avoidance. It ends up being on one level of this, on one end of the spectrum, right? And so I see how this impacts marriages substantially because a lot of things are going unsaid. And your partner who you do trust, you struggle with because at the same time, they are a trigger.
I'm even thinking of how our societal norms play into this too, because in the United States, our society is not a society that talks about sex. Like it's still taboo to talk about, oh, I'm married and my husband and I have sex. Like it's still weird to talk about that in public. So because our society makes it this taboo thing to talk about, it makes it even more difficult in marriage. So for someone who's listening, who is thinking, oh my gosh, yes, this is the struggle that I'm fighting right now. How do I talk to my spouse, my significant other? How do I begin these conversations? What does that look like? Because I want to be safe and I want to have a successful 25-year marriage, right? Like, what does that look like?
So the biggest thing is to identify where you're at emotionally. Before we even communicate anything, identify where you're at emotionally. Is this something that you've actually worked on, or is this something you've never opened up? So being very, very aware of where you're at. Because if not, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have this conversation. You're going to be pissed because throughout the conversation, you're trying to go ahead and hold back your emotions, protecting his and not trigger, and then you're going to see his response, not understand it or feel as if you're not being clear. And you're constantly feeling as if you're overcompensating or you're compromising yourself, which builds up so much resentment. And then it turns into an argument. And so this is why I say it is so important that you're able to identify, where are you at? Is this a conversation that you're able to have without a professional? And the answer might be yes. Also, the answer might be no. And if that's the case, it's not, there's this big stigma with therapy, right? There's a huge stigma with therapy. If you're in this place of, I'm not even sure how to wrap my mind around this. I'm not even sure how to have this conversation with my husband. Well, that's where a professional comes in who is trained to help you dive in and have these conversations. But first, really, really work on helping you heal and get some of that healing going on so that when you do have this conversation with your husband, you're able to put your guard down. You're able to have this really healthy, vulnerable conversation, feel empowered while doing it, and have the tools where you can explain or clarify if needed.
So a lot of the things that you were just saying resonated so deeply for me because my therapist said to me long ago, one of the best things that I can do is stop trying to insulate my partner from feeling those feelings that you're talking about, but to take their emotions, their reactions, everything else, not necessarily as a reflection of me. It's information. It's just information. And I think I've said this before on the podcast, but if not, it always bears repeating. Mike and I, when we first started dating, realized very early we are bringing our own stuff into this relationship and we really want to make this work. We have aligning ideals. We want to make sure that the blending of our families is not dramatic. It's based in things that are trust, respect, friendship, like all of these really good things. We've got messes that we bring to this equation, right? They're not always going to be pretty. The best thing that we figured out for us to talk about when we are having any kind of conflict, whether it's communication or otherwise, is what you're feeling something that's right now, or is it historical? If it's historical, I get it. I'm willing to sit here, listen, like that's fine. Like you feel, and that helped us disengage from that emotional piece where I can identify, I'm like, this isn't a you thing. This is something that historically bothers me in a big way, but it's not you. And it actually has created a lot more open communication where we don't have to identify those things nearly as much now, but it was so imperative, especially at the beginning of that relationship when it isn't something like, hey, we're 16, 17, just starting dating or really early in our 20s. Like we have an entire lifetime of crap that we are bringing here. Let's sort through it together. And just that little change in communication and aligning our wording was so helpful for us.
Well, what you're doing essentially for both you and your husband, Kim, is a lot of couples make the mistake of positioning each other as the problem. And again, for good reason.
No, he totally is sometimes.
Right? Right?
Never me.
Wait, is that not the case?
So they end up positioning each other as the problem, right? And then as they position themselves as the problem, the four horsemen, Gottman calls them the four horsemen. The four horsemen show up. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, right? Stonewalling. So those things come up. But when you're able, and what you and your husband have done is when you're able to both go, okay, wait a minute. We're both, I'm not going to position you as the problem. We're not going to war. But instead, is there a story behind this from your past? Yes. It's triggering something from my past. Well, then what you and your husband are doing is you guys are now aligning yourself together against the problem. So it's not you two that are the problem. The problem's here. You two are aligned together so you guys can combat it together.
Yep. And there have been times where I am indeed the problem. It's me. Hi.
There are times where I definitely recognize that I am the problem. And it feels so good in those moments to, just say, fuck it. I'm letting go of all of it. I'm not going to be a therapist. I'm not going to be healthy because those emotions come up so strong for me. And after the fact, after I've let loose, then I realize, totally channeling my inner Luis and Maria. Those are my parents. Totally channeling like them, like totally entered my body for a quick minute. It's okay. I'm not running the streets and I'm not going to hurt anybody today. So there are those moments. There are those moments that it does happen.
One of the things that I continuously find, and I think a lot of people will hear this, I know Kim especially will hear this and be like, yeah, that's it, is that I was in a relationship, a long-term relationship where the problem literally was not me ever. This was someone that was very emotionally abusive and very manipulative and very controlling. I basically learned that I'm not the problem, right? And so sometimes that can come back up. And I've also kind of gone before my husband in this healing journey. He and I both have this historical tendency to, because of our trauma, because of his job, my job, to just kind of shut down emotions because we can't deal with it. Like we physically can't, we will die. That's become our tendency, right? So we're learning to uncover that and figure out what our stuff is. But historically, I haven't been the problem, right? So I'm like, I get this little like sense of self-righteousness. I'm like, but I'm not the problem, right? And so I think a lot of people will hear that and agree.
Well, yes. And being able to identify what problems you are bringing into the relationship. So if you recognize that you are in an unhealthy relationship, okay, so what problems am I bringing in? Well, there's no boundary. I'm still in this relationship. That is definitely a problem. I am still in this relationship. So in a sense, I'm still co-signing some of this behavior. I recognize that he's erratic, he's unable to self-regulate, and I am still here, which is the problem that I bring in. And being able to, obviously you into that relationship, being able to say, okay, wait a minute, that's the problem I'm bringing in, but I can choose to actively change this. I can't change him. I can change where I'm at and how long I'm in it. And then the other part with you and your husband, there's so much going on. And with the emotions, being able to go ahead and express the emotions or being the emotions, it becomes depleting. Being able to recognize, okay, this is overwhelming for me, being able to process through those emotions in, learning skills to process through those emotions and being able to circle back and have a conversation. being able to identify, what do I need? Why is this important to me? What is my ultimate dream here? What is my goal? Being able to go ahead and communicate that so you guys can be there to support one another, but you guys aren't there to carry each other.
Yeah, that's why I love that you started out the last real question we had, which was, how do you have these conversations about intimacy with, you have to know yourself? Because I think that for a lot of survivors, they will identify, a lot of our listeners, they will identify with this. Like, I don't necessarily know what I need. That's been something that we have had to work through, which is, how do I feel about this? What is the issue here? So there's just so many layers of complexity of trying to have these conversations around intimacy and having successful relationships. So I love that we can have all of these different perspectives and have you help us kind of navigate those.
Yeah, of course.
So as you're talking about this, though, I want to come back to how you phrased something. For those who are in those relationships that are, what you said, co-signing on that behavior, it's not always safe to exit that relationship. There may be things, you think of like your finances, or you're living together, or you share pets or kids or whatever it may be that keeps that person in that relationship. They do recognize that there is a problem, but it may not be safe for them to exit at that time. What would you say to that aspect as to the things that we do have control over when we are the victims in that relationship?
1,000%. I've worked with several women who have been in a extremely abusive relationship where if they left, their survival rate decreased. And there was a great amount of fear because not only would it impact them, it would also impact their children. In that regard, in working with women who were in that situation, I think of one of them in particular. And obviously, without giving identifiable information, she was in a marriage with a extremely high-ranking individual. There were times where he definitely did things where I have to say I'm shocked she survived them. I am very shocked she survived them. One thing she kept on doing was coming to therapy. She kept on coming to therapy. She was in sessions sometimes twice a week. And it was extremely difficult for her because a good amount of fear and at the same time shame, because she felt as if I recognize this is an unsafe environment and feel like I'm not doing anything for my children to protect them. When she was, but it was just this great amount, this heavy weight of shame that she was carrying. We were able to process through that. And she wasn't working at the time. And so there was definitely a financial need to stay. And then there were threats if she did leave. What we ended up doing was definitely providing her with resources. We were meeting sometimes twice a week. At no point did I ever criticize her. Did I ever shame her, judge her? At no point did I ever tell her to leave. Those words never came out of my mouth. Never.
Thank you for saying
ever.
That. Thank you.
Ever. It's important. It's important. And no, don't get me wrong. There were times I was like, well, shit, you could just stay here. You're fine. You know what I mean? I want to adopt you. Like all of the things of course I'm a human being. I'm a therapist, but I'm also a human being. And there were times where after I'm like, we're almost there, where I could feel it. We're almost there. However, I knew I was going to be no good to her if I told her, why haven't you left yet? I would be no good to her. She's already battling all of these emotions. And so through our journey, we talked about her trauma. We processed through. I provided her with a great amount of skills. Definitely challenged her. I challenged her like no tomorrow. When I mean challenged her, there were moments where it was like there was so much shame she was carrying, being able to help her see outside of that, like you're handcuffed to the shame, and being able to help her truly identify in what areas were keeping her stuck. Valid, there were things that were very concerning, right? And in what other ways can we create some form of movement? What do you have control over? Because it does feel very, very limited when you're in that situation. And I'm happy to say, yeah, she was in therapy for a couple years. One of my assignments that I gave her was, I want you to buy one piece of furniture. I don't even care if it's a picture frame. I want you to buy one piece of furniture because you keep on saying you want to leave. And so what is one item that you are going to leave with? Forget clothing, forget all of those things. What is one item you're going to leave with? She ended up getting an item from a garage sale. And every time they sat at her dinner table, it was a reminder that I'm not going to be in this situation. And yeah, she moved. They ended up getting a divorce. So slowly, though, I don't want to make it like she moved and it was perfect. No, she ended up getting a hotel, staying a couple nights, coming back, the guilt, the shame, all of the things, the manipulation. And then she moved from the hotel to actually staying at a friend's place. Again, a great amount of fear. There were a lot of things, the custody. So she might have lost her kid. And she moved from her friend's house to getting her own apartment, from an apartment to getting her own house. And each time she moved this piece of furniture with her, and we terminated therapy because she didn't need me anymore.
Amazing.
And she ended up carving something out in a shape of angel wings. And yeah, I have it here in my office. But for me is this reminder that change can 1,000% happen, 1,000% happen. And I get to be a part of it. However, I recognize I can't be the one doing it for people, and it goes back to mom.
Yep. Well, and that's the same thing that I think about with those that are listening who may be in a relationship with someone they're trying to support. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's somebody in your family, extended family, that you recognize from the outside what you're going through right now is not healthy. It's toxic. It's awful. It's all the things. Why won't you just leave? And it's so important not to say those words.
Never, ever.
Some of the things that were especially helpful to me were people who had boundaries. Like, I love you. I'm here for you, but I can't be here for you with this other person. So I'm going to stay in the background. I'm still going to talk to you, but I can't be there. And it's like, oh, the loss of those relationships is really hard. They're here, but they're not an active participant in it. So having those boundaries was helpful. And then when you're talking about some of the things that you did, just those small little exercises that are great reminders. One of the things that my therapist did with me was had me sit at a time where I'm feeling my absolute lowest. And it's scary. And what you're talking about, it can be potentially lethal when people are in those relationships and choosing to leave. That's the absolute most imperative time that they do have help and resources. She had me sit and say, what's one true thing about yourself? I don't know. Okay. What's one thing that this person said was not true? What's one bad thing? Now I want you to think of 3 other people. Would they agree? Would they say the same things? Would you, 10 years ago, would you say the same thing about you? What are some things that align? And so she had like a T basically drawn on this list. Here's what this person says. And you're going to start in the other column, but everything this person says is bullshit. You have to show me reasons that what this person said is real. And so she had me list out these characteristics or traits. And I carried it around with me in her handwriting. It was on a little yellow pad. And I'm like, okay, these are the things that I know that are true about me. And I didn't always feel it right then. I'm like, and the biggest one at the top was compassionate, because I was told, well, you're just not a compassionate person. Which now, Kara, for instance, am I compassionate? You're anus. Absolutely. I am to a fault, probably. But what this person was saying is that you're not compassionate by excusing the behaviors or by letting me slide when I do these things that are invalidating or awful or downright abusive. You're not being compassionate to me. It's not that I'm not a compassionate person. I am. I was just recognizing my own self-worth in those moments. So I had this sheet that I carried around with me. Now in my office, I can show you afterwards, but I have them. I made them into a print and they're with gold foil. And those things that I wrote down were compassion, strength, resilience, humor, maturity, courage, and purpose. Those are things that I know about myself that no one can take away from me. And I had those on a sheet of paper, and now it's a beautiful print in my office, in my home, in my happy relationship. So it didn't happen overnight, though. That is so much work that went into that one little thing. But those tangible reminders that you can carry around with yourself or that somebody else can give you. You don't have to adopt them and take them home with you. You can give them those little slivers of courage or those glimmers that we like to talk about. And those can be the keys to them recognizing their own self-worth and removing themselves from those hurtful, harmful situations.
One big question that I often ask my patients is, if your daughter had the same relationship you currently have, would you praise them or would you pray for them? And automatic, there's tears that come down. My next question is, for the next 5 years, let's look 5 years from now, would you be able to survive this? Would your daughter be able to survive this? And if your daughter was in this relationship and she said, Mom, I'm looking at 5 years from now, I don't think I could survive this. What advice would you give her? in that moment, you do see them alive. Like she becomes alive and she becomes protective. And there's this power and she's able to go ahead and think outside of the box and create all of these different strategies or this strong yearning to go ahead and make this next step. And you see that progress little by little based off of, wait a minute, my daughter was in the same relationship. We can do these things, because sometimes when you're in it, it's hard to see outside of it.
Because that love and that care and that fierce drive to protect that daughter, that person, is something that you've lost along the way for yourself. And we need to protect ourselves as if we are somebody that is the most important, compassionate, caring person in the world, that we have that strength and that drive to protect too.
Definitely.
And one of the things that I found myself continuously explaining to people whenever I was working in victims assistance, and you see these people who are traumatized by people who they love.
Mm-hmm.
I will just put it under that umbrella, whether that's sexual, physical, emotional, financial abuse, whatever that looks like. It's so complex. And when it's, well, why don't you just leave? There's just so much more to it than that. And then you have the complexities of, at one point, you cared about this person, they didn't look like that, right? And so I think sometimes as support people, the best things that we can do is try to be understanding and just be there and understand that side of things. Because when we say things like, well, why don't you just leave? And sometimes when we say things like, well, the things that they're doing, you don't deserve that, or it's not true, I think that that can almost be more isolating, because there's just so many levels of complexity. And I just love how we have given people some very real tips on how to kind of come out the other side and gain the confidence and become empowered of who they actually are. Because even in the relationship that I'm thinking of my past, I was told things that I knew weren't true, right? But the way I explain it to people is, if every single day someone who you interact with says, the sky is actually not blue. I know you see blue, but it's not actually blue. It's actually bright pink. You're just seeing it wrong. Eventually, at some point, you're like, maybe my vision needs to be checked, right? And so eventually that becomes your truth. So I love this very real tool of like, who are you really? And I think that's can be so healing for so many people. So thank you.
Of course. One of the primary reasons our brain goes straight to the negative is because I want you to picture your brain. Your brain attaches itself to negative memories like Velcro. Literally attaches itself to those negative memories like Velcro. It attaches itself to positive memories like Teflon. And so there has to be this shift in your mindset so that you're able to grab onto those positive things. But that takes a lot of skill and practice. And so at no point, are these women not compassionate or, a failure or a loser. It's none of those things. But to your example, Kara, like after a while, your brain is hardwired that way. And so it's definitely going to attach itself to all of that negativity, all of those negative statements. And it does struggle to see past it, even though deep down it feels like it's not true. After a while, it then becomes true.
One of the things that I get asked all the time, and I mean, I personally have struggled with in new relationships, is I have this really big thing in my past. How do I even begin to tell someone who I want to be my significant other or who is my significant other about my trauma in my past that may affect a sexual relationship? Like, how do we even begin to have those conversations? Or even taking it one step further, I get the question of, how are you ever able to be intimate with someone again?
Oh yeah, I get that one. Like, how did you know when you were ready?
Yeah, there's a couple things. So let's go ahead and I'm going to reverse them. So how do I know if I'm ready, right? The biggest part with how do I know if I'm ready? Have you processed through this? Have you really because we tend to compartmentalize things. And one thing I often get, especially for women who have been assaulted, is, oh, it's done and over with. I just want to forget about it. I'm going to tell you right now, that's not healing. And it's going to come up and bite you in the ass in one way or another. And what that might look like is panic attacks, anxiety attacks, depression, anxiety, undiagnosed depression, undiagnosed anxiety. There are all of these factors that play into it. So you compartmentalizing it and saying everything's okay. I know that to revisit this is difficult. I don't want to dismiss that in any way, shape, or form. I recognize that. And what you're doing is only increasing your body's level of stress. Your body keeps score. It doesn't forget. And so we definitely have to work through that trauma with a licensed professional, who has a background in trauma, 1,000% in trauma. Not all therapists are built the same. We all specialize in different areas. So just because we're a therapist one therapist is not for all. We all have different specialties.
I just want to interject something that just came up for me that I was thinking about, which is it doesn't affect me. This is Kim and I's lie that we tell each other every day. It doesn't affect me, right?
Yeah, it's the very Spider-Man meme. Nope.
Yeah. Right. It's none of us. So what I have learned, because I've been processing this over the years, like I didn't really feel like it did affect me, right? Because I was so dissociated and compartmentalized. But what I have learned is it looks different than you think. It might not be anxiety and panic attacks. It is keeping people at a distance.
Bingo.
Mm-hmm.
Bingo.
So you prevent intimacy. So you actually make it more difficult for you to let people in and be close because you don't selectively shove things down. You shove it all down, right?
Well, it might be when your friend that's a male maybe grabs you from the back to hug you. That initial jolt response, it might look like that. It might look like when friends are, opening up or sharing certain things. You will excuse yourself from that conversation or you will zone out. It might be where you wake up in the middle of the night, you can't sleep. You all of a sudden have these night terrors. It might look like racing thoughts. When we start to avoid, we're not participating in hobbies, we're not engaging in social activities. That, my friend, are all the beginning stages of depression. They are. And so being able to acknowledge and identify some of those things, that's when we do need to seek help. And again, it is not easy. So I do have a podcast on how to find the right therapist because that is also extremely, extremely important. I recognize that, again, it is not easy to do all of these things and it is 1,000% necessary. So really identifying have I worked on this? Because I'm not going to be able to have a conversation with, somebody that I'm in a relationship with. It's not going to just come out freely. They're probably going to ask you questions. So before having that conversation, being able to list out what are my areas of flexibility and what are my non-negotiables? What am I not willing to open up and discuss? And what are areas that I can go ahead and share happened on this day, but not go into detail and being true to those boundaries. That's something also a professional will teach you how to set those boundaries, how to go ahead and communicate. And they'll even provide you with not a script, but there's this acronym, DEARMAN. They'll be able to go ahead and take you through the steps, to describe the situation, express your emotions, assert yourself, and reinforce. But all of those things, you'll be able to go ahead and do. So definitely, if you want to engage sex, because let's just be honest, sex feels good, right?
Hopefully.
Right? Hopefully.
If it doesn't, that's an issue that could be contributing as well.
Bingo. So that's the other, that would be the other component. Do I feel respected by this individual? Is our relationship in a place where I feel comfortable having this conversation? Do I feel comfortable that they will hold space for this conversation to happen without criticism, without any form of blaming? Because if I do not feel like this person is capable of having a conversation without criticizing, judgment, or blame, if I don't feel that way, then probably not even, sex is its vulnerability, more than likely not willing to engage in sexual activity with them. So really, really putting in those factors.
The one other thing that I would add to that is that a partner should never make you feel guilty for not wanting to engage or not do something specific, especially after you've communicated or asserted yourself or made a boundary. Never should someone weaponize guilt in that way, because that, my friends, is sexual assault.
Yeah. And I'm even thinking of the complexities of how the body does keep the score, and the hips and the pelvic floor, and the dysfunction and trauma and the impacts on that, and how that can make sex painful too. And so if you are not ready to explore that, have those conversations hey, this hurts, it's not enjoyable, then maybe you're not ready, right? To continue that conversation.
Bingo. If you're not able to say, hey, I would like our first time, I want to start off with foreplay, or I want to start off with a kiss, or I want to start off with maybe just holding for a little bit and slowly working up to it. If you do not feel comfortable with saying that, I'm going to tell you right now, once you're in the act, your ability to communicate, your ability to search yourself and set boundaries, which is going to be extremely important, especially your first time after, it may re-traumatize you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have counseled many women who did not do these things, engaged in sexual activity, and they ended up literally pushing off the guy, screaming, ended up becoming a really big fight. He had no clue what was going on. None.
That did happen to me one time afterwards. It was not as close to the assault in college as you would think. I thought, oh, I'm fine with this act. And it was just literally a trigger in the middle. And I'm like, I cannot do this, and felt like I was coming out of my skin. And it is that full body activation, because not only, and it wasn't that this person did anything wrong. It was, I am having trouble feeling what I need to feel right now. And so I don't even know how to communicate this. And all that's left is for me to push off, when in reality, I probably wasn't actually ready to engage in something like that. But the more we have these conversations before and after something traumatic that happens to you, you're going to feel more prepared. And like, you have the language to communicate that with your partner. So working through these exercises, even though my raised Catholic insides are going, oh God, we can't say sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so weird, but we have this ingrained in us to feel shame when we bring up this topic, and there shouldn't be. That shame is exactly what keeps us from talking about these things, which is what keeps sexual assault and those types of actions perpetuated in our culture, because we think that somehow this is our fault and we shouldn't talk about it, which is, my friends, bullshit.
1000%. Learning how to set boundaries. And this might be another indicator. Am I capable of setting and respecting my own boundaries? Let's say even before we get to sex, am I capable of, setting and respecting my boundaries? Am I capable to challenge any fears with me setting those boundaries? Because if I am, and I've practiced this and I've already rehearsed it and I've done it for other things, big and small, then I'm going to be able to go ahead and set those boundaries and respect my own boundaries when there's any form of sexual contact.
I think that's a great point too, that it can happen in ways prior to sexual activities.
Yes.
When we talk about consent and boundaries, those things can be practiced all day long in all kinds of different ways. It does not always have to revolve around sex. And it's really important that it doesn't, because you have to learn where your standards, where your body, where your wants, needs, autonomy lie before you engage in that kind of activity.
Yeah. So if you have established that you are ready to engage in a sexual relationship with someone, this person is someone that is safe, you feel like you can set the boundaries, what would that conversation look like? If you had someone who said, I want to have this conversation about my past, how do I start? What does that look like?
So you've also identified areas that you are not willing to go ahead and share, and then areas you are. I want to make sure I'm clear with that too. Like, you've already established, these are the areas where I can go ahead and share. These are the areas I'm not. The conversation can really be something like, I do want to share something with you. And these, so I'm going to take you guys through DEARMAN. So DEARMAN is an acronym. It's a part of dialectical behavioral therapy. Marsha Linehan created this. And so DEARMAN is this acronym we use we teach and we use to go ahead and communicate effectively. It's part of the interpersonal effectiveness module. So you describe the situation. Again, keeping in mind what you are willing and not willing to share. So this is even before you say anything. I have something to share with you. It involves my past. Express your emotions. I am feeling overwhelmed with emotions. I am feeling a bit intimidated, uncertain. Whatever emotions you're experiencing, state them. Assert what I want. What do you want? Like, ultimately, why are you sharing this? And what do you want the result to look like? I want support from you. I want to continue to have these uncomfortable conversations with you. Again, keep in mind what your end goal is. Reinforce. So this is where you're basically stating, how will the relationship, how will this person that you're communicating with, how will this person benefit from doing what you've requested them to do? So in that moment, you're completely stating, this is the conversation I want to have with you. It involves my past. I don't want judgment. I don't want to feel criticized. I want to feel heard. I believe by us having this conversation, not only will it strengthen our relationship, but it will also build this level of security. Once that's done, how are you feeling after you had that conversation? What was their response? Was their response something that you feel comfortable with? Did they seem to be completely out of sorts? Once that's done, then you're able to go ahead and you feel comfortable moving forward. Then you're able to go ahead and do the same acronym. In the past, this is what has happened. Express your emotion. I feel so vulnerable right now, opening up to you about what took place. Assert. I'm willing to answer these questions. I am not willing to answer anything outside of that. So I'm asking that you respect where I'm currently at. Doesn't mean I won't answer them in the future. For right now, this is what I'm capable of sharing. Reinforce. By you respecting and not asking these questions, not only will that build up our relationship, that will also provide me with this sense of security. When I'm ready, I can share more. So we're doing it in stages, but the stages wrapped around your comfort level.
That's so good. That's like so helpful for people, I think, to have kind of a script, because it can be so overwhelming to even consider, how do I say this really big thing? Because it is so vulnerable to share something where you were taken advantage of or you had something terrible happen. And then again, we circle back around to that wanting to protect our significant other from those difficult feelings. It's like, well, I don't want you to view me different, or I don't want you to feel sad for me or feel angry or whatever. So thank you for helping people to have sort of a script of what it looks like. And I think it reinforces the things that you said before, which is if you can't set those boundaries, if you're not in a place where you're ready, then you wouldn't be able to have these conversations. It would be kind of just like dropping a bomb and being like, okay, bye, which I've definitely done.
Well, of course. Having that script. So the dear part, that's the what you're going to be doing. The man part is how you're going to be doing it. So you're going to be mindful. You're going to be intentional. You're going to be in the moment. The A, you're going to appear confident. You're going to like grasp on to that sense of, empowerment. The N, being willing to negotiate. If he says, hey, you know what? Do you mind if I ask you questions about when I kiss you? Do you mind? That's where you're willing to negotiate. And you can say, you know what? Yeah, I'm open to, or no, I'm not open to, wherever you're at.
I want to go through them again to make sure that I got it right. And I found a link that we will put into the show notes for those of you who are looking to enact this, practice this, go through, run it as a checklist. But it's describe, express, assert, and reinforce. Those are the actions. How you do them is mindfully, you appear confident, and you're willing to negotiate.
Bingo. Without compromising yourself. Anytime you want to communicate effectively, utilizing this skill, dialectical behavioral therapy, this DBT skill is so useful for any conversation.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit now. And because this has kind of come up in our conversation, Kim and I deal with this regularly, where we are working with people and we are having conversations that activate us in some way, shape, or form. That's something that I know you're very compassionate and passionate about, women being successful and professionalism. And we get asked often, what if I want to go into a field that I'm afraid may become triggering to me? What does that look like? How do I traverse that? I often even get emails, I want to be a victim's advocate, but I've been a victim. Will I be able to pass an interview? Will I even get hired? So if you have any things that you want to speak of in that arena, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
So I'll use myself as the example. Like I said, my dad was an alcoholic, heroin addict. Both of them did not graduate high school. I'm the first one in my family on both sides to have a master's degree. This doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And in addition to that, I might come across, right? I might come across as like a little bit, I don't want to say aggressive, but like very excited, very passionate about what I do. And so if you line me up with other therapists, like homegirl doesn't fit, like it doesn't fit, right? And I will say, my practice, I was able to establish a group practice, and it's a private pay practice. We don't accept insurance. I was able to establish a group private pay practice because I don't bullshit. There's no bullshit here. I am transparent. I am showing up as myself. And guess what? In therapy, I'm definitely challenging women and I'm providing them with my own life experience. That right there is key. I would say that right there is key to my business being successful. It is key to my patients, my clients being successful on their own journey because I don't do band-aids. I'm not just giving you skills. I'm giving you real life examples. And so for the woman that wants to be an advocate, for the woman that wants to go ahead and go after being an entrepreneur, you get to utilize your life skills, your history, because you were in one position. You were in one position where you thought you weren't going to be able to get out of it. And probably at one point you felt trapped. And I'm 1,000% talking to you right now. You probably felt 1,000% trapped. You felt as if there was no way out of it. And yet you're here. You're listening to this podcast. You're listening with this hope. We get to utilize that ounce of hope meshed with your years of personal experience. We get to share that journey with somebody else. And I'm going to tell you the benefits they will reap. Holy shit. I get a lot of emails or messages from my past patients 5 years later or 6 years later or whatever. And I'm going to cry. I get pictures of somebody who never thought they were going to get a bachelor's degree. And, here they are, they're sending me a picture on their graduation day, or somebody who thought they were never going to go ahead and be an interior designer. And now they have this full-fledged business. Somebody thought that they were never going to be capable of surviving their traumatic marriage. And here they are, they own a house and they have a career, and they're excelling. I get, Veronica, it's because of you. The reality is it's not because of me. It's because they trusted me to be a part of their journey. And they were willing to go ahead and step outside of their fucking fear and really embrace what they were meant to do. And that little ounce of hope became something so empowering that now they're in this state of not giving a shit and doing things scared and feeling so successful because they came out on the other side. So yeah, use your history, use your experience. That right there is golden, 1,000% golden.
Kara and I get those messages that I did this because of you. No, you didn't. We merely reminded you of something that is already within yourself. You have everything that you need to be where you want to be. We're just here to remind you. That's it. That's the point that we play here. We didn't do anything for you. You're the one that's doing the work.
Yeah. Use your journey, use your history, use your pain, use all of that because you are meant to do something big, so big. There's no way I would ever imagine having a podcast like Little Mexican. No chance in hell. When I walk into my office, I have a 6-office suite. When I walk into my office and the waiting room is full, families, couples, kids. And it's just holy shit, true change is happening. It's happening, right?
Yeah.
You had your angels along the way that helped you remember.
Hell yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I just think it's so amazing that we get to, in this era of social media just being so ever present, we are so lucky that we get to be exposed to so many people who are being so authentic with their journeys. And we have an abundance of opportunity for inspiration. And I just want to echo what both of you have said. That's it's not any of these people that have inspired you, that have helped you. I say in almost every single keynote, there wasn't anything special inside of me that allowed me to do what I did that's not inside any of you. So just remember, we are all healing.
Yeah.
I wasn't completely healed when I started this job in no way, shape, or form.
Oh, God, girl, don't even get me started.
Yeah.
Don't even get me started.
But also, what is completely healed even? What does that look like?
Listen, we're a work in progress. Yeah, I remember. So I did my internship at a hospital. It's a partial hospitalization program. So one step below residential.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm there and I'm in it and we're doing group therapy and I'm sitting across from, sitting next to my supervisor and she's facilitating the session. And here I am with my badge and this badge can get me into all kinds of security doors and everything. And one of the patients is opening up and crying and sharing, everything that she's gone through. And I'm like, holy shit, me too. Me too. I totally feel that. And I'm like, and she's just opening up and I forget my supervisor's there. I'm just like totally laser focused, on this women's pain. And I'm like, we need to get somebody to help us, and I'm like looking down and I'm like, oh shit. I'm wearing a badge. Like, that's me. Like, that's me. Like, we're fucked. Yeah, we're screwed. Obviously, this is yeah, we're fucked, right? And I'm like, oh my God. And I remember like there was something about that moment where it was like, regardless of me wearing the badge, regardless of me being licensed, like that right there, that moment right there taught me that one, even though I'm a therapist, I don't have all the answers because I'm a flawed human being. And two, I get to use that to connect with my client in a totally different way where I'm not this person that has everything together. Instead, I get to use that as there's still things there, obviously, and I'm a work in progress. I'm a work in progress. We're all a work in progress. I just happen to have some really cool tools and all of these years of experience behind my back. So we're going to get there and I'm going to show you how.
Perfectly put. I love it. Okay. This has been incredible. I know that you have a huge practice to run, and I love that our calendar aligned with your goals and what you want out of your life this time. I can guarantee we will have you back on the podcast at some point because you are just a wealth of knowledge and wonderful to give our listeners these tools. And this has just been such a cool conversation. I'm so glad that we happenstance met. We have a couple parting questions. First,
okay.
Given your profession, do you consume true crime content?
So you know what? I always wanted to like work in the jails, interview a serial killer. My husband thinks I'm crazy because he's like, no. I would watch like the first 48 hours or Snapped. I was watching Snapped like no tomorrow when I was a stay-at-home mom. Gosh, that was years ago. But yeah, I watched Snapped all the time. My husband would walk in and go, "Are you still you're watching that show again? Are you planning my murder?" And I'm like, "Well, no." But I know if I ever get into custody, it's like I want to speak with my attorney. Like I already know. No, but it was just like, yeah, I was totally into that. As of now, no, I don't listen to any of that stuff.
And then what would be your call to action for those people that are listening? I mean, you've given us so much information to go on, but if you had to give our listeners one call to action to get involved personally, professionally, just in their homes, what would that be?
Respect where you're currently at. Even if you're not in a place where you want to be, respect it, acknowledge it. Because once you're able to identify where you're currently at, that starts up the movement for change. If I can acknowledge where I'm currently at and I can identify that 5 years from now, if nothing was to change, I would be miserable. If I can acknowledge that, then I know that change does need to happen. And then I can go ahead and take that action. That's the biggest thing. Respect where you're currently at. Respect where you're currently at. Acknowledge it. Change can happen 1,000%. I mean, look at all of us, right? We probably never thought we'd be where we're currently at today. And we're here and we're continuing, to challenge ourselves. So yeah, that's what I would definitely give.
So tell our listeners where they can find you, keep interacting, social media, website, all the things.
Absolutely. So definitely listen to my podcast, Empowered and Unapologetic. That's on all platforms. You can find me on social media. My tag name is Hey Veronica Cisneros on all platforms. I have workshops, courses. I do coaching. I definitely do therapy. And I also have a free guide for you guys. It's called The 5 Mistakes That Are Killing Your Marriage. You can access that by going to veronicacisneros.org/guide. It's a free guide that I'm giving your audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of the resources and for sharing your knowledge. And I know that we will continue this conversation and I look forward to the next time we chat.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Veronica.
Survivor's Guide to True Crime is hosted and executive produced by Kimberly Corbin Rourke and Kara Robinson Chamberlain. If you love what we do here, please don't forget to follow, rate, and review the show in your podcast player. It's an easy and free way to help us and help more people find the show. To learn more about the guests featured or to find resources and information discussed on the show, visit survivorsguidetotruecrime.com. Thanks for listening. Well, see you later.